taking the time out today to be with us. So Adam, over to you. Sorry, Adam, you're muted, I think.
Thanks, Beth. Huge good morning to everyone, and firstly, thank you very much for giving up your time. We really do appreciate you joining our call today, and we really hope that you have a very informative and fun session with us today. And I think that thanks extends even further, given the challenges that you're facing at the moment. You know, talking to people working in schools and people working in maths and within education, you've got a huge amount of challenges on a day-to-day basis. So we're really appreciative of you giving your time, and we hope that you're going to have a great day with us. What we are going to try and do, and I'm not the technical whiz, but we're going to try and make this as informative and interactive as possible. So please do experiment with the tech. I'm going to try and experiment as we go along. So please do interact and enjoy the experience. Great. So moving on to our session today, we have a great title to start at 9:15, Multi-Academy Trust Growth and Academisation post-Covid-19. So not a difficult topic to kick off the day with. We've got a fantastic panel with us today, and just say a big welcome to Matt, Warren and Phil. Great to see you guys again. It's been a while.
Morning.
Good, and I get an opportunity because I'm not in the same room to take the mic. So Warren, I'm really sorry that Man City didn't win the league. Phil, great goatee, and Matt, I haven't got anything yet to give you some stick about, but I'll think about something pretty soon. So anyway,
I'm doing my best to join your club. Look, we have the same mug this morning.
Hey, there we go. We're both mugs.
Yeah.
Good. Great. Anyway, really fantastic to have you here today. Just to warm up the panel conversation, everybody would have seen your bios in the documentation that's come out for today's conference. But what they won't necessarily understand is the personality and the ethos of your organisations and what your organisations really stand for. So by way of introduction, I thought rather than me talk about you all, I thought it was best that you said a little bit about your organisation and what you stand for and what you're all about. So Matt, we'll kick off with you if we can.
Okay. That's we should be able to answer this question really easily, shouldn't we? I think for us as a multi-academy trust, our favourite word is capacity. So we think our job is basically to bring capacity to the individuals, the schools, and the system that we work with. We try to make sure that we do a lot of the boring stuff in the background, leaving schools with more time and more space to focus on education, and we spend a lot of our time trying to make sure that there are efficiencies, business strategy to support the schools across the trust and the trust itself, and also to make sure that people actually enjoy the job that they're doing and that we're one of the good ones, and making sure that we look after the staff that we've got. So I think in a nutshell, we just try to create as much time and space for people to do their jobs as well as they possibly can.
Great. And Matt, you know, having worked with you over a number of years now, I can echo that. When we come to visit you, it's a very fun environment to come and spend time with. Great. Warren?
Okay, thanks, Adam. Good to see you all, and yeah, we'll not linger on the loss of our precious Premier League title. I'm employed by Nexus Multi-Academy Trust. Our trust has been around for, we're into our 5th year now, 11 academies, the majority special educational needs. So again, I think probably very similar sentiment to what Matt said. Our trust approach is to have a real focus on enabling and facilitating, so at a wider organisational level, in making sure that we do that and make that approach to school improvement, or an individual school level, how do we enable and facilitate a better experience for children, for families? How do we enable and facilitate more sufficient supply of SEND expertise in the communities we serve? What does better look like? What does a true education, health and care provision look like? Because we don't really see that in line with what the regs expected and wanted. So that's pretty much our trust. We've recently adopted a moreover explanation of servant leadership in the way in which we try to conduct ourselves as leaders and as a trust. So that's us, based across South Yorkshire. I worked in the same community and local area as other colleagues on the panel for a number of years. So great to be here today, and hopefully that's short, sweet, and to the point.
Warren, thanks. That's great. Phil, now you're in a slightly different context, so. Phil, you're on mute.
Can you hear? Can you hear?
We can hear you now.
Right.
Yeah, we can hear you now.
Right. Morning. I think if we can drop the football references, please. As a Sunderland supporter, I think it'd be good. Right. I've got two hats on today. One is a founding director of Learners First, which is a large teaching school company based in Rotherham, but working across the country with partners in maths schools and other teaching schools. We run what we would call a leadership curriculum, which works with people from pre-initial teacher training through to executive leadership and math governance. Our strapline is connecting people and promoting excellence. So this COVID-19 has been an interesting experience, moving from face-to-face to digital learning, but we've actually created more partnerships during this process. My other hat is as a chair of a 13-school primary academy trust, which until recently just functioned as 13 schools. So we're going through a process of bringing those schools together to function as a collaborative trust and as a true partnership, and thoroughly enjoying that part of the role.
Brilliant. Thank you, Phil. And, as I said in my introduction, absolutely fantastic that you've been able to join us today, because we've got a wealth of experience on the panel. So I hope my questions live up to your experience. I'm going to do my best. Just by way of a little bit of logistics, I'm going to ask some questions first. And then as I see questions coming in from delegates, I'll start to introduce those questions into the debate. So the first part is controlled for the panelists in the sense that I know what I'm going to ask you. You don't know what I'm going to ask you. But the second bit is who knows? We'll just get whatever comes in. COVID-19 has created masses of challenges, and that's masses of challenges across all sectors. So everybody that Oaks works with is having to learn as they go along. They're developing, they're changing their ways of working, etc., etc. But probably in education, that's more acute than in most other sectors, because you've been told to close, then you've been told to partly open, and then you've been told to plan for full opening. You've had to incorporate digital learning. You've taken on much more of a community well-being role, etc., etc. So what I want to explore first with you is what are the biggest challenges you've faced, and how have you overcome them? And Warren, I'll kick off with you in the first instance.
Thanks, Adam. Well, I mean, I suppose it's where you start with this one, really. I think the biggest challenges from our trust perspective is just the diversity and difference that you can get from moving a few centimetres over a local authority boundary line as a start for 10. Because I think what we've seen throughout the COVID-19 crisis is naturally a lot of reaction, and then further reaction to decisions that at the heart are made by our politicians. So I think the biggest challenge for us has been just ensuring that we've got a level of consistency, fairness and equality in the ask that we make of all staff. And that's not unique to Nexus Multi-Academy Trust, that is across the entire education sector. And I mean, we laugh about it. Just when we get over, or we start to seem to be getting over the Brexit debate, something had to fill that void, didn't it? And that's what coronavirus seems to have done for many, in that everybody has their own individualised opinion on what's right, what's proper, what's safe, what isn't. And certainly within local authority areas, you also have that political dimension as well. So I think the biggest challenge for us has just been trying to nail down what is consistency and what is the right responsible thing to be doing. Which isn't about aligning yourself with a political ethos or political viewpoint. It's about actually what is legally the statutory bottom line, what we've got the opportunity to take decisions on for locally, and what haven't we. And rightly or wrongly, and I am about to say this on a broadcast conference which could be recorded and repeated elsewhere, so this may be my last appearance as a CEO, but rightly or it's been quite simple and straightforward, I felt at times. You know, whether I agree with the advice and guidance or not, it's informed by government experts. The government commission us. We have a funding agreement with the DFE as academies to follow government advice and guidance. And even if that advice and guidance has been inconsistent, it's given us a fairly clear way forward. I think in special educational needs in particular, what we found is that the duty to deliver on an EHCP has not been suspended. It's been slightly amended to reasonable endeavour, but actually, and this is where it's been an interesting perspective from within the majority SEN sector, as our trust is, the majority of our trust is SEND, is we've not had the option to close. We've not been instructed or directed to close. We've been told to stay open if families want to send children. So our dilemma has been, how do we resource that? How is that safe? How do we ensure that we keep children with complex medical needs safe? And how do we balance that with parents who are under, you know, real stress and duress with some really complicated behaviours and challenges for their pupils? And again, you know, what you've got is you've got that element of the SEND pressure, the legal status, in a wider context of huge mixed messages and inconsistency. I think the other fascinating part for me as we're coming through the coronavirus crisis in terms of challenges is the change in narrative. So, you know, history is being rewritten very quickly with the pen of hindsight. I believe that I've seen the actual recordings that a High Court judge ruled 2 weeks ago that actually schools legally were never instructed to close, and therefore they should have been open for children. Government just gave us advice. Which anybody working in education, if they're drinking a cup of tea, coffee or orange juice now, will likely spit that out if they've not heard it, because it has not been advice. You know, the government, when the Prime Minister stands there and says schools will close their gates on Friday and will not be reopening, that sends a pretty clear message about what we're expected from schools. And then you have you know, high-ranking politicians, Lord Adonis being one, coming out and publicly criticising schools for what they haven't been doing, what they should have been doing. So I think that that's the biggest challenge that we face in this you know, acute moment in time, before we even look at reopening and, you know, everything else we've got to deal with more widely, is actually what were the expectations at the time? What did we do? What was the guidance versus the direction? And how do we reconcile that with the narrative of, you know, very short-term history and, you know, the rewriting of that? So does that answer your question, Adam? Does that give you some insight into it?
Yeah, Warren, it more than answers my question. So, thank you for that. Phil, what have been your biggest challenges? Still on mute, Phil. While you're sorting that out, Phil, we'll go. Matt, you come in and.
I'm hoping I'm not on mute. Is that okay?
You're not on mute.
That's okay. That's good. Yeah, I think I totally agree with Warren. I think from our point of view, the biggest there are three areas of scale really. The biggest area of scale for challenge has been the amount of noise that we've had to cut through, and the amount of say conflicted opinions, multitudes of different attitudes towards schools opening, closing, whether it's parents, politicians, local authorities. We work across three local authorities as well, with three very different positions and ways of trying to support their mainstream schools. and also how they connect with the multi-academy trust sector. And I think what we've had to do is try and really spend time on behalf of schools. So, you know, I think Derbyshire is a local authority with 400 schools in it. And what we've tried to do for our relatively small number of schools is read all the guidance on their behalf, interpret it, and give them very much things that are useful to them. So the how of what how you might respond to the guidance, not just here is the guidance, go and work out what you need to do. And we've seen different strategies. Derbyshire have done a pretty good job of re-sending out the guidance so everybody's aware of what's happening. But where we've seen some gaps, we've seen gaps around, you know, useful documents and useful strategies that will save schools time. And again, going back to creating capacity. We've seen the noise as being a really big issue. Responding to that with a really clear communication strategy. So we very quickly decided that we would have a single point of communication with schools. So the emails generally come out from me, but that's a huge amount of work, reading, effort, responding from the team. It all comes out from one place, so schools aren't getting bombarded with lots of different information. So, and for us also, keeping heads calm and keeping staff calm and trying to make sure that at the core of all of this is a very human response to a very chaotic situation. You know, it took me. I think when we went into lockdown, I was actually on some residential training in Reading, which didn't finish till the Saturday lunchtime, and I had about a 3-hour drive to get home. And that 3-hour drive was the most useful period of time that I got at the beginning of this, to just go back to our core values and to go back to looking at, you know, how we need to respond to this and making sure that we're not putting people in harm's way, whether that's a member of staff, whether it's a family or a pupil. So yeah, I think the big thing for us was filtering the noise. I think there are lots of, we call it happy accidents that we've managed to come out of okay. So we have a pretty strong digital strategy across the trust already. So within days we were able to just give iPads out to all the kids that needed them. Staff had already got kit, and we already worked in the cloud and had online communities across the trust. So that was fairly simple for us, but again would have been a key piece of work for, I think, lots of people in the sector. And the last thing would just be looking after individuals and responding to their individual needs. And my favourite one is, again, like Warren, this may be the last time that I've already mentioned Derbyshire, but I mentioned the DFE now just to throw that in at the same time. The attendance form that schools are expected to fill in has been an absolute ridiculous joke of a piece of work at the most critical time. And so I could practically hear the cheers from the business managers when I just said, do you know what, I'll take the pain. Don't fill it in. Save your time and do it. So we haven't filled it in yet, and we get daily emails. So yeah, I think filtering through the noise, making sure we've organised things properly, and then looking after individuals have been the biggest challenges. And we think we've come up with some solutions. Probably not all perfect, but you know, who is? Apart from you, Adam.
Yeah.
Spotty call.
Thank you, Matt. Phil.
Can you hear me now?
We can hear you.
Good. Right. I think as a chair of the trust, one of the big challenges was working with our CEO to determine what really matters at this time. You know, what are the imperatives rather than what other people are telling us we should be doing. And at the forefront was safeguarding in all its forms, and that includes staff as well as pupil. I think big emphasis on curriculum planning now and post-COVID, and also just trying to be a good, considerate employer that gave some security to staff that were having lots of anxieties. I've watched a lot of trusts suck decision making up to the centre. We tried as much as possible to provide a framework, but to allow communication decisions about opening at a local level with heads and leaders that the local communities, parents and children knew and trusted, rather than a chair of trust or a CEO suddenly writing to parents for the first time ever. So all of that sensitivity, being aware of. I think one of the things as a director is to just try to maintain a focus on planning a strategic response beyond the present, particularly for us around a financial plan that would allow us to deliver the school improvement imperatives that are even more pronounced after this. I mean, a massive piece of work there around not gaps but chasms in learning. So that's, I think, been the key challenge, not to get sucked into every single decision that is being made at a local level around not just opening, but how you open, how you communicate, how you react to some of the anxieties that parents have. And as my good colleagues alluded to, not to buy into other people's agendas all the time, to retain that sort of sense of your own purpose. So I think that would cover most of it.
Brilliant, thank you, Phil. So I'm picking up some consistent themes there, and just going through each of the different contributions. Warren, you talked a lot about consistency and being able to work out what is consistent, what does it look like, etc., etc. Matt, you talked about the noise and trying to wade through the noise and about what's important, and Phil, similarly, you did that. And then we talked about the individuals. What I want to focus on is if I'm part of the audience and I'm not sure of what to do next, where do I go? So, you know, Warren, if you were unsure of something, or Matt or Phil, where do you go to get this consistent view? Who do you phone? Who's the help?
I mean, I suppose for me, it's the team that you work with. So there's been no decisions that we've made as a trust. There's been no personal decision I've made on conviction without testing that out first with the head teachers, with the people who are the most affected by this. And like Phil said, and Phil said to me before, actually, in recent times, why would you change your behaviours in a crisis while you'd behave in, business as usual? And I think that's the key strength, I think, of how anybody's responded to this is, it's extraordinary times. Try and behave as ordinarily as possible. So my starting point is to speak to people who, from an education perspective, from a school perspective, know their families, know their workforce best, so that what we have is a nuanced approach that allows for flexibility. And it's an odd way of answering the question, Adam, but I suppose one of the things that I've actively tried to do in crisis role is to really limit the number of times where we've required a tablet of stone statement about the way that we're going to do something. Again, if you want a tablet of stone, well, look at what the department are saying, even if it's now advice and not direction, because we've got some clearish stones, pummy stones there a little bit, maybe, but it's written there, it's written in there. And then actually just stand back and reflect what does need to be a really clear, decisive statement made. Or actually what would be far better served by having nuanced flexibility, which can be best applied to a local context. And the only way that I understand what's needed in that regard is to speak to head teachers. And again, in this period, some of our heads have been really clear that what is most comfortable for them and most enabling is having that flexibility. And I think, in fact, I say all of our heads have felt that, even if the initial reaction is right, we need certainty and we need assertiveness now. Actually, assertiveness and certainty, in some regards, ends up being a rod for our own backs. So it will be head teachers. I think in terms of checking out, thinking, therefore, in the few areas where I'm not clear about what it is that we should be doing, well, I'd speak to, Phil is somebody who I'd call. I'd have a conversation with colleagues who I know and trust who've got experience. And I would always have a conversation with my chair of trustees to just make sure that what I'm thinking isn't a million miles away from what the directors are prepared to support. But I've worked really hard to try and deconstruct any of the issues that we've had, so that we don't need to, reach a definite final, this is exactly what we're doing. And therefore that has, in many cases, reduced a big possible pressure.
Yeah, fab. Great, thank you. Matt, I just want to move on to the individuals who work for you. So that's teaching and support staff. And I know when when lockdown started, we had a leadership team meeting, and you're talking about, can we safeguard people's jobs? Can we look after them properly? How are we going to motivate people who live in or are working in remote locations? So, you know, a huge amount of our time and effort was how do we look after the people that make our business what it is. You employ significant more people than we do. And they're in hugely remote locations all over the place. And then when you dilate that further with home working, how did you tackle that people challenge?
I think again, going back to the digital strategy, that we've got one email address that we can just send to everyone across every employee across the whole trust, and we've made sure that everyone's got access to a device where they can actually communicate back with us, so they're not just emails going into the ether and things like that. But we've used a variety of different ways of doing it. So if it was about trying to calm the workforce and make sure that everybody knows that we are there to support them, and that in their own individual context, in this situation, pretty much every way of feeling is okay, from people who were petrified to leave their own house and didn't feel like they could come to work, and telling them that that is totally reasonable and that is okay, to people who were trying to ignore the health and safety advice and come to work when they really shouldn't do, and telling them that coming to work is not okay, but the feeling is that they've got a frustration. So we managed to communicate those kind of messages en masse from the centre, to just say, look, first things first, your jobs are fine, you're still going to get paid, and we're still going to work to support you, and then refer, you know, head teachers to making sure that they had spoken to and done individual risk assessments with their staff, and kept in touch with them. So I think in terms of getting in touch with staff and making sure that everybody was okay, the communication strategy we had got worked really well, but only because there was a decent IT strategy underneath it. We used a variety of different ways of face-to-face stuff, and you know, we quickly adapted to Teams and things like that, and also, you know, doing pre-recorded videos and just putting a link on an email saying, look, there's a load of words here you can read, or you can watch this and you can see someone's face. So trying to close that gap and make it feel less distant. But you know, like Phil said, I think where we've had some strong messages to give out around the way in which we want this to work, that's come from the centre. But then when we've had messages to send out to parents or individual staff, that's been, we call them shop windows, but we tend to create a first draft, have that critiqued by trustees, central team, partners, and people, you know, who would read that kind of stuff, and then we send out the second draft to schools and say, look, this is what we think you might want to say. You can copy and paste it, or you can add, amend and change it, but it's a model that's been thought through, which should save you a bit of space and time. So yeah, I think it's been a variety of different things. You know, for the first time ever, I was on WhatsApp with a group with the heads, just making sure, and the rules were just post stuff that makes us laugh. You can't work on this group. And so just a variety of different strategies, both trust-wide, but also down to the individual level.
Brilliant, thank you, Matt. Phil, I'm going to change topic again, if I may. Schools have a massively important part to play in their communities. But, you know, as I've been watching the news, as I've been talking to other leaders in the MAT world, schools have taken on a far greater community role in this period. Have you seen anything in your trust where you think we've thought and acted differently to support our community?
I think it's degrees and scale. So if you look at vulnerable children, I think we serve a significant number of disadvantaged areas, challenging areas, and I would say that a lot of our leaders and staff have gone over and beyond the call of duty, visiting homes where there's been no contact, children who we know that are vulnerable, keeping daily contact with, given that other services aren't making those connections. I think something as simple as taking responsibility for making sure children are fed, you know, the real fundamental needs there have been at the forefront. That goes back to what really matters at this time. And I think we all know from experience, some of us are older than others, that when you have situations like this, recessions, crises, we know that those that are least well off suffer most. And whilst that's not a fundamental priority of a trust, set down the object and articles, it is at the moment. Making sure that the most disadvantaged, the most vulnerable in society, we do what we can to help protect them as much as we can. And that's been a real focus of a lot of the work and a lot of the discussions. And that includes the learning gaps that are widening, but also the disadvantage gaps and the acute poverty that we're seeing in some of our communities. And again, what I would say is, you know, those communities don't want the chair of the trust making contact with them. They want us to enable the staff, the leaders that they know, to make contact with them, the leaders and staff that they trust. So that's been it has been a fundamental focus of a lot of the work that we've done. And also trying, if I'm honest, trying to agitate with other services to do a little bit more for some of these families. And I do think that part of our strategic planning going forward, that will continue to be a focus. But if I watched how staff have responded, that would be a particular aspect of what I've seen. And to be honest, I have my admiration and gratitude for how they have responded to this. So I don't know if that answers your question.
Yeah, it does. It does, Phil. Good. We're going to move towards looking to the future. So we've done quite a reflective view of the challenges you face, some of the ways that you tackle those challenges, and some of the key things within that. We're now going to move much more into sort of future projections as to how things might change. So the first part that I want to look at is educational policy in relation to COVID-19 and particularly in relation to academisation. So do you think there are big policy changes looming, or do you think people can expect a very similar environment moving forward? And I'm going to ask my panelists to put their hand up as to who wants to go first on this one. Who fancies this question? Phil, go on.
I guess the big question is do we understand the current policy around academisation, and is there one? A lot, you know, maths are businesses, but they're also public services. I do think that coming out of this across all sectors, finance is going to be a massive driver in policy or activity. So in terms of academisation, the push that the likes of Agnew, Nash before he went, around merger, acquisition, I think that will become more pronounced. I think some of the financial realities will come to bear around that. I don't think that the 7 billion that was promised to the education sector before this is likely to be there after this. So I do think finance will be a driver around academisation. If you look at the DFE, their hands around academising those schools that have chosen not to be academies, they're a bit tied at the moment. It's predominantly relies upon the Ofsted framework. Where's that going to go in the future? You know, if you're not in special measures or having had 3 consecutive RIs, then there's no ability for the DFE to intervene. I don't know if that might change. I think the sector itself can shape and influence the policy moving forward. And I think that you're already seeing moves that with some of the more forward-thinking maths, where we have greater collaboration, more strategic partnership and alliances around things such as finance, procurement, school improvement, and I think something that will be critical moving forward, governance. So I'm not convinced that there will be a change in policy. I think my guess is it will become more financially driven from government. But as ever, I don't think we should sit and wait for that to happen. I think if MAT leaders or organisations such as Learners First Rating in this sector, we should start to devise our own policy, our own approach to this, rather than necessarily waiting for government to tell us what to do.
Yeah.
So that would be my initial thoughts on this, Adam.
Okay. Any Warren?
Yeah, I think Phil's absolutely right. I think what has been fascinating in this period has been the degree of power playing and power grabbing that a number of local authorities seem to have done in their local areas, which again has been almost enabled, not just passively by the DfE. They've almost tried to push that, and I think that's been for me quite alarming. I've been quite concerned about that, because we've not implemented the Civil Contingencies Act. So actually, in terms of power and authority, when you see a mayor of a local authority area, in our case Doncaster, writing out to say that, or having a headline to say that they're telling schools they can't reopen, well, actually that's a really inaccurate headline, because local authorities don't have that power. But that headline isn't challenged by government. You know, there is no, there's no response provided to say, hang on a minute, no, that's not what the power that local authorities don't have that power for academies or for their own maintained schools. And because it's gone unchallenged, I do think that, probably out of convenience, because it's always helpful to have somebody else to blame if things don't go right locally, and local authorities typically have always had to suck that up, you know, unfortunately for them, from central government. But I think my concern is, what does it mean coming out the other side of this? So for everything that Phil said, a fragmented sector, and my worry is, what will this mean for the role and function of local authorities, when in my personal view, I haven't seen too many doing a particularly good job of getting it right in their local authority area. I've seen, as I say, in my personal view, power plays that have gone unchallenged and unchecked. And you know, life has taught me so far that reality is often more informed by perception than fact. And there seems to be a perception now that local authorities are suddenly playing a major role in overseeing and directing education policy locally. So what I hope for is that the DfE do everything they can to challenge that. But as Phil says, you know, other than the finance and bringing schools together for financial efficiencies, I'm not entirely sure what the policy is going to be moving forward either. It feels like what we've done is taken a step back to pre-2010 in some regards, which is a bizarre place to be occupying, a bizarre space to be occupying right now, with the government that we've got and the policy, the people driving the policy within it.
Great, thanks, Warren. Matt, anything you would like to add?
Only that I think, like with most sort of big opportunities, the first question we tend to ask is, what can we get away with? You know, what do we have to do really, and what can we sort of tread our own path? And so for us, watching the sort of the education sector across 3 local authorities and how it's developing, there seems to be a polarisation from school leaders on whether the people they're connected to, whether it's a local authority or a multi-academy trust, of whether they've done a good job or not. And I think it's really going to either cement some people's opinion of, I'm in the right place and I'm being well looked after, or it's going to make people start to look around and think, well, they did a pretty good job, or that person there seems to be like a really good, strong leader and he's looking after it. So I think that polarization of opinion may have an impact. But with regards to you know, the financial aspects and policy in general, I can't remember a time where I've ever thought, this is really great, this is really good. So I just think we get used to existing in uncharted waters and trying to find our own way through problems. This is just another version of that, but I tend to think there may well be a little bit more of an opportunity. And I know all trusts are different and they're all got different sized central teams and things like that, but now schools have reopened and things are a little bit calmer. It's given us that opportunity to really sit down and reflect on some of the key strategies that we've got. So as you know, and we've talked about, one of the things that we really want to do is to have a centralised funding strategy, which doesn't feel like we're stealing everybody's money, but is using strategies like building social capital to better things for all the children and all the schools in the trust. And you know, I've managed to spend a significant amount of time with the CFO and the central team, making sure that we would all buy up to that before we run out of money later on. There's no time to think about it, and we just have to pull everybody's gag. So I think there are opportunities within all this, and you can probably get away with an awful lot during this period of time while confusion reigns.
Great. So if we're advising the audience, which is really what this panel is all about, is don't be too overly concerned about trying to look into the crystal ball, because that's going to remain very hazy for quite some period of time, and it may never clear. And take control of your own destiny. Is that what I'm hearing? Yeah.
Yeah.
Great. Okay. And you know, Matt, you and I have talked about this before. It's sort of ask for forgiveness, not permission. So it's a case of, at the moment, get on and do it, and then let people unpick it later on, because your communities and the pupils and the teachers you serve need you to be leaders today, rather than waiting for something to change tomorrow. Yeah.
Exactly.
Great. Okay, good. Well, that's helpful. I interpreted that correctly. In terms of, just before I ask this next question, please, audience, if there is something specific you want to ask, do post it in the questions. I'll see those as they come in. So if there's anything specifically you'd like to direct either to the panel in general or to any individual, please send that through. So moving on to my next question, the new normal, or back to normal, or normal, whatever we might call it, what's that going to look like? So we talked about not future gazing and this is not policy, this is within your local sort of environment. So yeah, what is it going to look like? Matt, I'm going to start with you.
I think it's going to be a blend of a sort of a blurring of the lines around a lot of things that we do. So our schools have, at their level, have found much more efficient ways of sharing the work that they do and creating resources that they can use. I think there are some interesting developments around. So you look at the Oaks National Academy, which I think in one part is a really great opportunity for sharing work across the country and saving workload and all the rest of it. But I think the thing that people need to be careful about is you can organise things for people so much, but when they start to lose freedom and opportunity in their own daily work, that then becomes disenfranchised. You know, you don't really engage with it as much as you might do as if you've got a little bit of ownership over the things that you're trying to deliver. So where we are making changes and where we are looking at that new normal, we're trying to make sure that the same amount of freedom and responsibility at the end of each process is still sitting there. So, you know, we've looked at our school improvement model and how we have trust partners that go out and visit schools on a weekly basis to help and support. You know, we now know that we could do that virtually the vast majority of the time. So, and we have been doing that. I think even our central team, you know, I've worked in this room for what seems like 50 years, but I think the working patterns for people with a bit of flexibility will change, and I think that's a healthy thing for lots of people. But there'll be other things that schools will have experienced that they might want to hold on to. So at the moment, the vast majority of our schools all close on a Friday afternoon for deep cleaning, but also PPA, and there's a lot of collaboration going on between staff within and across schools, and schools really value that. So it's trying to cling on to some of those things that people have found that have been really helpful and really useful during this period of time, and sort of building that into the new normal. But I would imagine it's more a blurring of the lines rather than a complete overhaul.
Great, thank you, Matt. Warren?
Yeah, I think pretty much the same, really. I think next year is going to be a lot more about negotiation and compromise. And I think good leadership and management is all about negotiation and compromise. But I think that, you know, there's going to be far more facets to that for us next year, and we need to apply that to every element of what we do. So, you know, we've already had an announcement that parents will be fined for not sending the children back in September. That's the headline. Actually, what we need to be really clear about is it's about building confidence, because if for the majority of parents, if they don't want to send their child, particularly if we're talking about a special school, it's because they've got a very good justifiable reasons to do that. Fining them is not going to win trust and confidence. So I think that what we have to be is as measured in that as we are with our staff, where, you know, 6 months ago, the idea of somebody saying I only want to work 2 days this week when they're paid for 5 days would have sounded like heresy. You know, you would have laughed and said, great, where can I sign that contract? Whereas actually throughout this period, we've had to be, as long as we can be, is understanding and compassionate, not any more than we usually are, but in a different way. And I think certainly for the autumn term, that's where we'll get to. And I think the other big driver for education is always, whether we like it or not, Ofsted are constantly you know, a factor that we have to consider. You know, the best schools don't develop the curriculums, don't develop their offers around what Ofsted want, but we have to be mindful of it. We can't ignore that. And I think there is a really big question about what is the future of the accountability framework in England going to look like for schools? Because, you know, those 3 months of lost education is going to have huge ramifications for, you know, for years to come for a wide range of pupils and learners. So what does that mean for SATs? What does it mean for GCSEs? And what does that mean in terms of our, you know, how we prepare for Ofsted and what that looks like? Which again, it's not, it would be wrong to say that is what motivates any of us on a daily basis, because it doesn't. But we'd also be lying if we said that doesn't play a big part in thinking how we construct our narrative and how we prepare our narrative for inspection. Yep. And existentially, there's a question I think Ofsted will need to ask themselves now, which will have an impact on us as a sector moving forward.
Great. Phil, I'm going to phrase I'm going to drop you right in here. I'm going to ask you the question slightly.
Makes a change, Adam.
Yeah, absolutely. You support so many leaders in the sector, and you will have seen an evolution in the way those leaders of Max have changed and the skill sets and things that they need to develop and so on. In the new normal, whatever that might be, do you think leaders will need to develop new skills, need to change, need to think or act differently, or have we got the skills and experience currently in the sector and it's just about adapting to a new environment? Sorry, big question, Phil, I appreciate, but...
It's a difficult one. Do we have... I think we do. I think we do have the quality of leadership across the sector. I don't think it's evenly distributed. I've seen a polarization during this process where some of the worst traits of our, say, executive leaders have come to the fore, where they just suck up the decision making and they believe that working harder and forcing staff to work harder is the most appropriate response. Yep. And I've seen others who have responded in what I would call an intelligent manner. We often say that, you know, the role of directors and leaders is to take information and data, analyze it, and turn it into intelligence. And I don't really think at any level we fully understand the implications of COVID-19. I don't think there's been that analysis of how this will play out. So the leadership quality that we're going to need in massive amounts is that sort of agility, that intellectual agility to not just respond to things, but to scope the future. And I think that's just emerging now. So if you look at learning, you know, Matt's referenced it, Warren's referenced it, you've referenced it. We will see a more diverse blend of learning. But what I would say is we've really got to ask, is that the right approach for the children and young people we serve? So if we're moving to a greater digital platform, we've got to look at the reasons as to why we're doing that. If it's convenience and finance, is that the right reason? So I think that those challenges to leaders around why we're responding in the way that we do will become ever more important. And I think that the governance in all its forms will become important to just appropriately challenge leaders and how, not just how they respond, but how they plan to deal with the new normal. I don't know if that makes sense. I don't think we've got the leadership, but it will require a discipline amongst our leaders in terms of how we frame the future.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
they're my random thoughts, Adam.
No, Phil, it was a tough question, and you know, I know in my organisation, in our sector, we asked ourselves, what have we got to change as leaders? How do we have to react? And I think the thing is you've got to dig deep into some of the things that you might not have used, you know, for quite some time. You've got to think, how do we deploy those? I've just got a question from the audience. I've got two things to do. So one from the audience, and then I just want to wrap things up with a final question to you. So the question we've got from the audience is, how has the COVID crisis impacted your ability to generate income? And how would you plan to mitigate these risks? Matt, I'm going to go to you first.
Obviously, at school level, there are some, you know, we've got schools with swimming pools and things like that. So there's some self-generated income at school level, which has obviously been difficult to maintain. There's been a shift in the sector around what will be funded and a pause around some of the normal applications for writing bids and things like that. So we have John Bell, who works in our trust, who works very closely with Oaks, and they had a number of applications which were really strong applications, which are just on pause. And so what they've managed to do is to use this time quite creatively to go back and look at alternative funding models and looking at different sources of income, which will help us now in this situation. And you know, I know they did submit one bid a couple of weeks ago, which was for one-to-one tuition. So we thought, you know, what would be a really good idea in this situation would be to get a member of staff who can go around the schools, do one-to-one tuition and make that catch-up progress. And so we sent the bid off, and then 2 days later, Boris Johnson was saying, "I've got this huge fund for one-to-one tuition." So I think that was probably Stefan and John feeding that idea to the sector. So well done on that. But yeah, I think there's, again, it presents challenge, but it also presents opportunity. So we're spending time looking at what the next year of applications might look like around funding, but also trying to think slightly outside the box and look at different alternative ways of generating income, which we can then utilise, again, to build social capital right across the trust. So I think it's been difficult in some senses. If you just look at it black and white, that there's less opportunity because things are on pause, but there's also more opportunity because you get to think differently. So it's been quite positive for us, and you know, I have to say that the support we've had with Stefan and from yourselves has been really useful during this period of time, because it makes us think, not education. It makes us think outside of that sector, which has been really useful. Okay.
I've got another interesting question, which I certainly didn't expect necessarily to get, but I'm going to ask it. How is the sector responding to Black Lives Matter movement? Not quite our agenda for today, but quite an interesting question. So how is the sector responding? You'd like to go first?
I'm happy.
Go on, Matt, and then Warren.
I think, you know, in a lot of the settings where we're working, and again, this is one of those things where we can place shop windows for schools to reflect on and to look at and to utilise. A lot of the sectors, settings where we've got early years particularly, They've audited a long time ago using things like ECHA's audits, which are from the dark distant past somewhere, but we've already placed those audits into the curriculum to make sure that everybody in school can see a reflection of themselves in the resources and in the curriculum that's been offered. So but what it's really done is brought a bit more robustness to that conversation, not only where things like those audits existed and those conversations happened, but right throughout not only the school, different key stages, but also staff, things like risk assessments and making sure that we're considering all aspects of risk assessment for all groups, not just like, well, there's a risk assessment and I've done with it. I think so it's brought a real challenge to the work that we do, and it's now a regular consideration. Overtly, it was always a consideration for how do we include everyone, but I think it's just brought that little bit of clarity and that little bit of robustness to the conversations we have, school level, trust level, and it's been really welcome. I think it's been really really healthy for the sector, but also for the whole society to just be having this debate and having this conversation and seeing some of the things that come out of it. One of the things that we've really reflected on is, yes, what we think we do now is really great. We might say that what we do today, that piece of work there is something we're really proud of, but in 5 years, 10 years, it might be seen as wrong. And how do we keep reflecting on what we've done and where we are to make sure that we're not a piece of history that we don't want to be part of. So it's been really good for us as a trust.
Brilliant, thank you, Matt. Warren, just on that one as well.
Yeah, I mean, I suppose I have to be really upfront and say that there is an element of discomfort as a white British man making a commentary on the Black Lives Matters movement, because by definition, I'm coming at it from a position of ignorance. I don't understand what it feels like firsthand to be a black British citizen looking across the Atlantic and seeing the extent of police brutality. And I think what we've seen with the Black Lives Matters movement is, I don't think there is a sector response, because I think that the movement itself is evolving and changing on a regular basis. What started out 3 or 4 years ago as a headline, a phrase to sum up the African American community response to police brutality, as in this country been viewed more through the prism of our, well, actually you could say British values, our legacy, our history, our culpability in colonialism and the slave trade. And I think, like Matt said, actually what we should be doing as a sector and what we should be doing individually is reflecting on what that means for our communities and the message that we give in our communities. My biggest concern in the communities we serve in Rotherham, Doncaster, is a complete misunderstanding over what that headline Black Lives Matters means. Because it is very quickly becoming, we saw a couple of weeks ago, not because I'm a City fan, but at the Etihad, a plane flying over from Burnley fans saying White Lives Matter too. And I think the first reflection we need to undertake and challenge ourselves on is there a shared understanding of what this movement's about and why? Because the headline doesn't seem to be getting through to everybody. And actually the people it's not getting through to aren't necessarily our pupils, it's their families. I come from a multiracial family. I have a sister who's dual heritage. Her dad's Jamaican. So my mum has got a dual heritage child. And again, I probably shouldn't say this on a conference, but when I went down to visit my parents at the weekend, my mum were almost lamenting and bemoaning the fact that people are saying Black Lives Matter as though that's more important than other lives. And other than being aghast, I thought, well, actually, this is just for somebody who comes from a multiracial family who's had a dual heritage child, she doesn't understand the purpose of the message. And I think that what you've got is a very oversimplified headline and actually a real complex driver behind that people don't understand. So for me, in terms of what the sector needs to do, what's the sector doing? There isn't a sector-wide response or approach, really, and there should be. But equally, actually, what we need to do is understand, like we do with everything, how do we need to personalise how we apply our approach, depending on what the needs of our communities are. And let's not overestimate that, because the majority of leaders in education will, by definition, likely be middle class and well-read. The fact that we get that and understand that doesn't mean that everybody actually does. And a little bit like when we were going through the whole pre-Brexit debate, if we just demonise everybody who doesn't understand it as a racist or ignorant, we've missed an opportunity to be able to educate people appropriately. So they've been my 2 pennies worth on it. Great.
All right. We have now 2 minutes left in our panel discussion. What I'd like to do now is we've got a large and diverse audience listening to us today, and I'd like to give you the opportunity to give a single pearl of wisdom. So if you're advising your colleagues sitting in the audience listening to this debate, what's the one thing that you would tell them to think about as we move out of COVID into a new environment? What's your one piece of advice? And I'm going to start with you, Phil, if I may.
Oh, thank you again, Adam. If you're leading in a mat or an organisation, as ever, it's just invest in leadership. It's every level. And that's not a hierarchical position. It's a mindset, skill set. Just giving the people the opportunity and the means to just make intelligent decisions that make children's lives better. The other thing would be an absolute plea. And I know I've said it before, but we in our sector, I think we've just got to be massive advocates for economic change to protect the most disadvantaged and vulnerable. I think after 10 years, we don't know the full effects economically of this, but we know it'll impact upon the most challenged communities most. And I really fear for some of those families. And I think whilst we've got, you know, a real imperative and obligation around learning for all children, I think moving forward the next 2 years, we've got to be the advocate and the champions in particular for the most disadvantaged and the most vulnerable in our schools and communities. So be one observation, but a plea really to all colleagues in the sector.
Fantastic. Matt.
Yeah, I think Phil's captured it spot on, that it is about leadership, and if you've got the right leadership in place and in all its glory, it should cover everything else. And I think for me that the one thing that's stood out, just a couple of things. I mean, there's the famous Mike Tyson quote of everybody's got a plan till they're punched in the face. Just assume it's going to go wrong. You know, planning worst case scenario has been our biggest strength, and we kind of always work that way. But it was one of those accidents that we planned worst case scenario for a number of things, and it's helped us in this situation. And I think avoiding the Titanic syndrome of what we do now will always be okay. You know, so just trying to remain agile. You know, and with the right leadership and the right balance of leadership across teams. I think that's the thing to do, is to make sure that you've got the right voices in the room and the right mechanism for driving things forward. But definitely agility and an ability to reflect on where you are now and where you might need to be and what you need to change so you don't hit that iceberg is probably really key moving forward.
Brilliant. Thank you, Matt. Warren.
At the risk of undermining everything that has just been said and what I'm about to say, I suppose my starting point is don't necessarily listen to everything that other people say or presume that other people have got wisdom that you haven't. No offence, Matt, Phil, or intended to myself either, but I think that, you know, what I found, I've been at my most stressed when I've listened to how other people are doing things and gone through the motions and realising why that's not the right thing for us. So I think it's really easy to say this, but be courageous and just stand by your values. That's the best advice I'd give anybody. You know, make it simple, or make it as simple as possible. You know your communities. If you don't, speak to the people who do know your communities and just do the right thing for them. And if we're all in this business for making a difference for children and families, then really, if your values are driving that, you can't really go too wrong. Don't knee-jerk and think that good leadership in a time of crisis is making big Churchillian speeches and bold statements about how you're doing X, Y, and Z. Live with the discomfort of being out of control and letting other people be driving a lot of the decision making, as long as you're confident that you're moving in the right direction. But I did start it off by saying don't listen to other people, so kind of undermine what I've finished with there.
Great, Warren, thank you. And Warren, actually, it was really interesting as you spoke, because you took quite a lot of the things that I'd written down in my paper as to conclusions from our debate. So I put lead with confidence, which I think you talked about courage, and I actually think courage is probably a better word than confidence. So lead with courage. Keep it simple and cut out the noise. I think that was consistent message that came through, and be prepared to sort of do the analysis yourself, work out the solutions that are going to work best in your location, and have the confidence to put those in play. Warren, you talked about understanding your community, and I think probably more than ever, it feels to me that COVID has driven insight into the sector, where we're trying to learn about how our communities are made up, what are the needs of our pupils, what are the needs of our parents, what are the needs of the teachers. So I think being insight driven is really quite important, and let's not lose that moving forward. I really like the point about adapting to people's needs and being able to be flexible and sort of break the previous mold as to what you felt comfortable with and adapt to suit people's needs. And then the final one, which I hold very true to my own values, is look after the staff, look after the people that really do make your organisations buzz. Because if you don't look after those people, the whole machine breaks down. So I'm going to conclude at that point by just saying a massive thank you to our panel. It's, as always, guys, it's great to talk to you, and I look forward to when we can sit down and have a beer and meet in person. But it's been great to see you virtually, and thank you for giving up your time. I hope very much that the audience has taken a lot from the conversation. I certainly did, so thank you for that. And just apologies to the conference team at Oaks for the fact that we've gone over by 5 minutes, but that's because I keep asking convoluted questions. So gents, a massive thank you very much. To the delegates, I hope you have a great rest of the day and get loads from the rest of the conversations. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, and good luck. Thank you.
Yeah, have a good day.
Wow, thank you, gents. That was absolutely fantastic, and really wide scope of topics covered there. And I just love the comment that your community needs